Welcome back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and for the 200th time, let's talk horror. Today, I am joined by horror screenwriter and film analyst, the beautiful Jerry Sampson. Jerry, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Ken. How are you?
I'm doing so well. And again, I want to just say this for like the thousandth time. This is the 200th episode of my first horror movie, guys, and I am so excited to be able to have done this with 200 different amazing and beautiful and awesome and talented guests. And Jerry, thank you so much for being episode number 200 for me. This means the world to me.
I'm so excited to be number 200. It's great.
Well, a little bit about Jerry for you guys that don't know. Her love of film and horror genre leads her to explore and question the darkness that lies in the shadows of inherited trauma, and finds themes coming up consciously and subconsciously in much of her work. Not only that, but she writes for Ghouls magazine, Rue Morgue, Horror Obsessive, Scream magazine, and so much more. But you guys don't have to go searching for any of that, because I have all that, as well as right down here in the description, her social media links, as well as some of the links so you could purchase some of the writings that she has done. So let's hear you talk about you a little bit. People don't want to hear me talk about you. They want to hear you talk about you, Jerry. So what can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, I mean, I am a horror lover. I mean, as everybody that comes on here is, and I write it, I watch it, I read it. It's just everything to me. It's in every part of my life, and it has been from a very young age. And I'm a screenwriter. I write horror. I have a book of short stories. They're all pretty horror based. And even on, like, a good day, my comfort is sitting down and just watching the same shit over and over again. So,
Absolutely. Like me and my wife last night just rewatched Sometimes They Come Back, and that's to me my favorite Stephen King film. And everybody's like, "Really that?" Yeah, that's one of my comfort movies. I could watch that movie 1,000 times in a row. And it's funny how some of the darkest and most twisted things are what we find comfort in. Like I've always thought that was pretty funny.
yeah, and I tend toward like the extreme. I write about extreme horror a lot. And that's what I write about on Rue Morgue. It's kind of extreme horror from like a female gaze kind of thing.
Mhm.
And I mean, honestly, one of my comfort horror movies is Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer. And, like there's something about the aesthetics of that really dark, grungy horror that
Yeah.
is very comforting, even when it's just absolutely, brutal or like for me, if I tell somebody, hey, maybe you should check out Martyrs, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just trying to be like, hey, I like this, maybe you'll like it, even though
Right.
it's not for everybody. And like our comfort is different for everyone.
Mhm.
And that's, I just kind of like, you know air a little bit darker than most.
No, that's amazing. And I'm always excited when I get to talk about women in horror and talk with women in horror, because I've always said this: horror has always been ahead of its time when it comes to cultural issues, whether it be, racism with Night of the Living Dead, or, even with the Candyman, Tales from the Hood. Horror has always reached down to these social issues and making women badass back in the 70s, 80s, when they weren't really the badasses in film. You had your final girls that were out there, whether it be Laurie Strode or Ripley, just kicking ass. And horror has always been ahead of its curve. And now we have these avenues with social media and the writing that you guys do with your websites and everything that we can stay in touch and learn. And that's really what it is for me, is education, learning from a different perspective, whether it be from a female or a person of color, somebody that has a different perspective on film that I love. And we could have two completely different opinions on the same movie. And I've talked about this with The Exorcist. Growing up as a young boy, The Exorcist didn't hit me the way that it would hit a young lady.
Mhm.
And now, as a father that has daughters, The Exorcist hits me in a completely different way than it did as a kid. So to
Oh,
be able to read what you do, and especially with you being so extreme on your side of horror, it's amazing to see a woman that writes such extreme horror as you do. And I hope that you guys check that out with the links down here in the description. So make sure you're clicking them, because these women work their asses off and they're so proud of the work they do. I'm proud of the work they do. And you're going to be very entertained, and you're going to learn some things. You're going to be educated if you read what they do. So please click these links and show her some love. Um, Now, before we get started on why we're here, how long have you been writing?
I've been writing for, I mean, years and years. I wrote my first horror story when I was in fourth grade in my Christian school. I got in huge trouble. I think I got sent to the principal's office, and my mom freaked out because, the mom died. So that she really took that personally. And, but I mean, that stemmed from a lot of reading horror even before that and being fascinated with the genre. And then I kind of took a break for a little bit, took a break from like writing and watching horror and any of that. I'm going to be a singer and I'm going to be an actor, doing everything. And I came back around to it, like 10 years ago, writing, that is. And it's really only been in the past couple of years that I've gone in on more of the film analysis side of things and hooking up with other amazing female horror writers, and film journalists. And that's a lot of who I work with at Ghouls magazine. Definitely check out Ghouls because it's all women or women identifying writers talking about like all the best horror. And so yeah, I mean, I've been doing it for a long time, but I haven't been a professional for that whole time. And it's been really in the past like five years or so that I've really gone in hard on just like taking it seriously. And because it's what I love, you can't deny it forever.
Well, and you could tell just even the conversations we've had before actually physically meeting here. I can't say physically, but face to face meeting here. Your passion that soaks through in your writing. And that's one of the big reasons why I wanted to have you on here, because I can tell how passionate you are about what you do. And when you're that passionate about what you do, it rubs off on people.
Yeah.
And I like to have that energy around me. So I'm so excited to see and hear and let everybody know where this started for you. So let's get into that. We know what you got going on in your life right now, Jerry, but I want to go back to the past and talk about how horror started for you, your first horror movie, and your first horror movie was
It, Stephen King's It, which is technically a mini series. It started out, but because they, put it together in one nice little package back in the day, I had I had those VHS when I was old enough to get
VHS.
them. But I did watch it on television when it was the mini series. But it was my first. I consider it a horror movie through and through. And that was when I was 5 years old. My sister babysat me, and she was so pissed off about having to do it that she sat me down with a blanket and put on It.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's funny because I remember being like, watching this as the miniseries.
Mhm.
And I wish that they still did miniseries like this now. I mean, we get limited runs and stuff like that, but I mean, like you had this, Sometimes They Come Back was a made for TV movie. The Langoliers, Rose Red, all these Stephen King movies that they made into these TV miniseries. And it's so amazing to go back now and watch, because especially with It, and I've talked about this before, this holds up today. Maybe some of the couple CGI things they did here and there and a couple of the practical things aren't as great as they could be, but I've seen movies made today that look a lot worse than this, and this was made for TV on a small budget. So now this is a movie that, and I'm with you, it's a film. I've always called this a film that is so iconic, and not just horror circles, but you go out into people that don't even watch horror and they know who Pennywise the Clown is, because he's the thing that nightmares are made of. In this movie full of completely iconic and amazing scenes, Jerry, what would you say is the scene that affected you the most from the 1990 It?
So it's more of a theme, because it is two separate scenes. And the first one was when Bill takes Georgie's photo album off of his bookshelf, and Georgie winks at him. And I remember that being the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. And I mean, 5 years old, it's really young to remember things, but I very viscerally remember that feeling. And then when he throws it and it starts like oozing blood, and I mean, that was real. And we see Pennywise before that. We see him we see him grab Georgie, but that was for some reason so terrifying to me. And then again later when the Losers Club get together and they're looking through Mike's photo album, and that scene, I still have dreams when I have like fevers. This is a part of my fever dream, when Pennywise is bouncing down or flipping down the old time street. Yeah. And he growls at one point when he sees him and he points at him. And Like that was my first taste of like true fear. And I mean, I can't say I was hooked from that moment, but I was so fascinated at like why that was so terrifying. And then, it just
Yeah.
shows up in your dreams and there he is. And then, he reaches out of the photo album. So that becomes not just this experience of seeing a picture coming to life, but now it's coming out at you and now it's attacking you and like all of their expressions. Um, that's just like my all time. And I just watched it, I think 3 days ago, and it still gives me the chills. It's a really like a lot in that movie. It still does it, like you said, like it still kicks.
Yeah.
Even with some of the kind of janky CGI, it still is. And maybe I'm a little biased because it was my first horror movie and because it really got into my psyche, but whether or not that's the case, it holds up and those
Yeah.
scenes hold up. Like there's a reason they were kind of imprinted on me.
And I think a big thing with what you're saying with the photo album, because I always talk about that scene too. That's a scene that really got me. And when you see him wake, we all have looked at, especially growing up in the time period that you and I did. I think I'm quite a bit older than you, but we had photo albums around the house. It wasn't all on a phone. We had photo albums. We had our school pictures hanging up down the wall. And I can't tell you how many times I would look at pictures and just wait for them to wink at me or go through my
Totally.
photo album and just look and try to like catch me, like see if I could get it to
Yeah.
wink. Like that's how much that scene affected me. And it really, really, especially like my grandparents that had passed on, like looking at their pictures is really what got me. Cause I'm like, well, Georgie died and he's alive in a picture. So maybe my grandparents are still alive in their pictures. Like as a little boy, those are the things that go through my brain.
Totally.
And I can totally relate to that. So I'm glad that that scene hit you just as hard as it did me, because that's one of the scenes in the movie that really, even to this day, I was really bummed that that was not in the 2017
I know.
movie. That's one scene that I wish they would have been able to do, because I think it would have worked beautifully if they were able to do that in that film.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I don't know why they skipped that because rewatching it now, they really did put a lot. I mean, there were a lot of callbacks
Oh
to
yeah,
the original. So it's interesting, to kind of see what they left out and the fact that that was such a huge part of it, at least to me. I mean, it has to be to other kids. And there is, I mean, it's just that it's something so scary about like if you stare at yourself in the mirror, that's kind of scary. But then if you're
yeah,
staring at a photo, yeah, that's a living or a dead person. And our imaginations, that's just like the quintessential scene showing children's imaginations, because I think we kind of lose it as we get older, but as kids everything can be scary. But nothing is so scary that it's like life threatening, it seems. It's like everything can be fought. And so that scene is just such a great, like the fact that they've got this like shared vision of Pennywise is it's so bonding too. It's like a really bonding scene in the movie because that's the first time I think that they all really saw
yeah.
when they were together as opposed to being separate.
And a word you just used that is perfect for that scene is bonding, because this is the point where Stan really breaks.
Mhm.
It's not real, it's not real, and they finally get him to say, yeah, it's real.
Mhm.
I can finally say such things are empirically possible. Now it is possible because you've seen it right in your face, because Stan's the one that actually shuts the book and throws it. No, it's not real, it's not real. And you have all these kids that are together, these seven young men and women that are bonding and holding each other and getting closer and closer, where I did it over breaking windows, they did it over a killer clown. So
Yeah.
so Jerry, when you think about it, the movie It, what is I think I know the answer, but what is the first thing that pops into your head?
Oh, I mean, it's always Pennywise. But it's like a certain Pennywise. It's not even Pennywise at his scariest. It's not Pennywise with his teeth out. It's Pennywise when he's, and I mean, when I was younger, I didn't know he was being a dick, but when he's being a dick and he's tormenting them with, his words, and he's in it was scarier to me when he was in his I'm just a clown kind of thing, and that was like the very thing. I remember when I was a little bit older, I went to a fair in my small town, in Southern Oregon, and a clown came up to me like out of the fair, and I kicked him. Like I kicked him in the shin because it was such like a, you can't trust this person. Like there's something wrong with him. So, it's like really easy for Pennywise in his monster form to be scary, but for me, it's Pennywise when he's got like the wet lips and his teeth, his nice shiny straight teeth are out, and he's just the guy that's gonna tell you to trust him, and then he's gonna snatch you.
Oh yeah, well, and I agree with you. Do you have Prince Albert in a can? You do. Well, you better let the poor guy out.
Yes,
Like that is absolutely terrifying. And
it
we'll
is.
get into more of that here in a second with a question I have for you. But before we get there, I want to stick with this for a second. What scene, we talked about which one affected you the most, but what scene would you say is your favorite scene from the movie?
Mm. I think my favorite scene, and it kind of varies because when I rewatched it again, it it brought like a little something different for me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and it has. I've watched it over the years just to kind of revisit it. And I think the scene when Beverly brings the guys in, and it's always, all these scenes are when they're kids. These are the ones that impact me still the most, even though the adult scenes are great. It's when she brings all the guys into the bathroom. And again, it's another bonding moment. And she has thought to that point. And of course, I connected with Beverly, um, obviously, because I was, a little girl when I watched it. And so when she brings him in and she's like, I know that if, and this is like one of her flashbacks, like if they don't see it, then I'm really going crazy. And they see it and they help her clean it up. And I just always, like, I always appreciated that. But even watching it now, and maybe it's just because we're also like divided for the past like 2 years, separate from other people, is a very kind of comforting nature to that, even though the whole place is covered in blood and it's super morbid and these kids are like scrubbing blood off of a sink. And then that was the only time that it stayed gone because she
Right.
cleaned it up before and Pennywise came back to mess with her. And the only time that it stayed gone was when they all did it together. And I think that's just like one of my favorite scenes. And it's really, the kids in that movie, the actors are so good, and just the way that that young actress that I can't remember her name right now, but the way that she just emotes when she sees that they see the blood, like it's awesome. I love it.
How overwhelmed she becomes with both fear and happiness at the same time. The fear of they can see this too, but also the happiness of they can see this too.
Mm-hmm.
You have all those emotions in a young lady that's all wrapped up into one ball, and she just almost breaks right there. Like the rubber bands are getting so tight, and she just breaks. Like, of course we can see it. And you have some of them cleaning, and the other ones comforting her, letting her know, we're here for you. You're not in this alone.
That's it exactly. And Beverly is a survivor of abuse, and
Mm-hmm.
the book and the movie deals with such dark themes, and like themes that when you're a kid you don't really see in the same way that you see when you're an adult. And so much of the kind of culture of like our culture, it's all about shame and silencing abuse victims. And you can really see that a part of her is being seen by these friends of hers, and it can really represent like a lot of different things in that moment. And just one of those things is the fact that she's been living in this darkness, and the bathroom with the blood represents a lot of that. And then finally she's seen, she's understood, and it's recognized, and now it's out in the open. And that's Pennywise's weakness, when you separate him, obviously, but when you confront him and he loses his power. And I just think that that's like, it's Stephen King, whether he meant to or not, like at that time when he was writing it, like he really touched on some really like important things. And I think that it still holds up. I don't know if they did that as much in the new one. I don't know if it was, I feel like it was a little more of a visual spectacle in the new one, but the old one definitely.
And with the new one, which is, I'm glad you brought that up because we're about to segue right into that. The thing about the new one is I love the acting in the new one. I think the acting is phenomenal. I love Bill Skarsgård. I think that Bill Skarsgård did an amazing job. But the question that I have, and I always ask this when we talk about it, Which Pennywise do you prefer, Tim Curry or Bill Skarsgård, and why?
Well, I do love Bill Skarsgård too, um, but I think I love him a little more because of just what he can do with his face.
Yeah, how that's all him himself.
It's all himself, yeah. And I just like the Skarsgård, so I give him, he's got a like special little place in my heart. But not even from a nostalgic point, having watched both of these versions kind of recently, it's still Tim Curry for me. He's got a real maniacal, cruel um, way of coming at both the adults and the kids that I just don't feel the most recent one really nailed. The most recent one, it's a little more of like he's more of a monster, and maybe that's because of the CGI stuff pulls me out of it a little bit. The mouth, even though it's cool imagery, him on his downtime just isn't quite as evil or cruel as Tim Curry's Pennywise. And I feel like I'm saying that from a really unbiased perspective.
Well, and
I'm trying.
no, what I wanted to go back to, I said I'd go back to this in a little bit. Um, when Pennywise as Tim Curry is not the monster, when he's the clown, as a little boy, if I had never seen these movies, obviously, it's an approachable clown. It's somebody that I would want to go and play with because he looks like a fun, that to me is the John Wayne Gacy, where it's this monster that's hidden in beauty with the clown and the Skarsgård one. And again, I'm not knocking Skarsgård. He's phenomenal. And his performance as Pennywise was phenomenal. But even when he's not the monster, there's nothing approachable about him. He's always terrifying. And what you were talking about earlier with having to use our imagination, that to me is what makes Tim Curry's Pennywise so much scarier because he's approachable. He's that clown that kids would want to play with. I want a balloon animal. And then he gets you. He lures you in with that soft, almost kindness he has with his face. But it's the monster underneath that makes it so much scarier. So I have to agree with you where I think Tim Curry is the scarier version of Pennywise when he's not the monster because he's approachable. He looks like a normal, beautiful clown. And I know most people don't put beautiful and clown in the same sentence, but in the context of what we're using it as, because he was obviously, Kings came out and said it before, John Wayne Gacy was the inspiration for this monster. And that's what John Wayne Gacy was. He was a community guy. He was loved by the community. He was a clown that would go out and play with everybody. And he had all these dirty secrets under his floorboards. And that to me is what makes Tim Curry's Pennywise so much scarier is the monster underneath the beauty. And you didn't get that with Skarsgård. It was always the monster, in my opinion. So I got just a couple more questions for you, Jerry. Back to the original It. Obviously, as horror fans, and you morbid ass, we love the kills. It's something that we are drawn to. It's something we love to watch. We love to visualize it, unless it's a puppy. What would you say is your favorite kill from? And not favorite's dark, I know, but which kill stuck with you the most from It?
Mhm. When I was a kid, it was Georgie.
Mhm.
He and that was probably it was a cross between Georgie because it happened after, but the very first scene of the movie with the little girl going into the sheets and the tires spinning, and I swear I just watched it and I could have sworn that there was like blood coming off of the tires, but I don't think I saw it this time around. So that's one of those little memories that I don't think really exist. That
No.
was it then, and then rewatching it, the belch going into the God, it's not even a vent; it's a pipe.
Yeah, like the sewer pipe.
Yeah, the sewer pipe with just watching like the lights coming in, and I forgot how terrifying that was. And I think that's because it's a little later in the movie, and it's a trek to get there because it's a 3 hour
Yeah.
experience. But that scene, even for me, was super creepy this time around. And I remember it being creepy then, but I just didn't have as strong of a memory because of the way that he was folded and his eyes are open, just like staring straight ahead. That I think is my favorite, and I think that's a pretty good one, all
Yeah.
around in just movie history. Because something about somebody with their eyes open, and you
Yeah.
know he's gone. Like that's a dead boy, but he's still just staring straight ahead. He's in that place between death and life, and that's got to be the one for me.
Yeah. And what I love about that scene is you have a millisecond, and I mean a literal millisecond, where Henry Bowers becomes a human being,
Mm.
where Henry Bowers isn't the monster anymore, where he becomes a human being right alongside Stan. And he's like, oh my God, he's gone. Belch, like, and for that millisecond, you feel for this monster. And now I believe that when we're talking about Tim Curry's Pennywise being scarier, sure, I totally believe Henry Bowers in the new one is much more of a terrifying figure. And it's obviously because we got to remember this was made for TV. So a lot of the language and a lot of the violence couldn't be up to what they wanted it to. That's why they were able to up the violence and up the language in the newer film. But the Henry Bowers in the newer film is just an even bigger monster than what we've seen here. But to watch him be humanized for that half a second, you almost feel for him watching his friend get taken away. Mm-hmm. So, well, Jerry, we talked about your first horror movie and how that movie affected you. But now here for a second, I want to throw you a curveball and I want to go scream on you. What's your favorite scary movie? What is your favorite horror movie of all time?
Oh, of all time. I mean, I know like literally every person that you've ever talked to is probably like, that's an impossible question. It's almost like I have a favorite scary movie for every decade, but I feel like I could always say The Shining. And that's not anything original, but I mean, I can classify it extreme and just regular horror. So my favorite extreme horror movie is Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer. So The Shining and Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer.
The Shining is always here in the background.
Nice.
Yes. I adore that movie. There's so much about that movie that Stanley Kubrick, I mean, people bitch about it, but I'm assuming we're talking about the Kubrick movie.
Oh, yeah.
Not the Stephen King TV one, right?
No.
Okay.
No, although I do know that there are many fans of that one just because it's a little closer to the book. And, I'm a huge Stephen King fan, but I am a Kubrick. Kubrick, I'm here for Kubrick.
His influence on that movie, understated. I mean, like people bitch about what he did to get his actors into the method and the actresses into the method, but it worked. I'm sorry for what, Shelley Duvall had to go through. Nobody deserves to be treated that way with having cast members ignoring her. And, she thanked him later on, but it's a little extreme for me. I don't think people should be treated that way, but love the film. So, method to the madness, I guess.
Exactly.
My one last question for you before we go. We're going to go back to It for a second, and we always end this with the same question, Jerry. We end it with a skull count. Now, what we're doing is we're ranking It 0 to 5 skulls. You can use half and quarter skulls. However, we're not being critics. We're not judging this on film composition. We're not judging it on the writing, the acting, the directing, the lighting, the score even. What we're doing right now is we're ranking this strictly on what this movie means to you and how much this movie affected you on first viewing. So 0 skulls being the worst and 5 being the best. What would your ranking of It be?
It's a 5.
Gotta be. And for
it's
repeat viewers, I'm
it's
sorry.
It's still a 5, even now. Yeah.
And for repeat viewers, I'm sorry you got to hear me say this again, but watching your first horror movie is like doing drugs for the first time. And I don't condone drug use, but you get that high and then you're always chasing that dragon. You just want it more and more and more. And I don't remember my first comedy. I don't remember my first sci-fi, probably was Star Wars or Alien. It's sci-fi horror, but I remember House from 1986. I remember that vividly. And we don't get rom-com con. You don't get that. I've never seen anybody wait for 3 days to dress up like Ryan Gosling from The Notebook and go to a hall and spin somebody around and tell them if they're a bird, he's a bird. Doesn't happen. But we get HorrorCon. That's what this means to us. And you get some of the nastiest people that have played I'm not saying nastiest people, but they've played the nastiest characters. And they go to these conventions and they're the biggest sweethearts in the world, or they come on your podcast and they're the sweetest people in the world, but they write about the most morbid things, weirdo. And, it's amazing. The horror community is so amazing, and it's such an amazing thing to be a part of. And I'm so glad that I got this opportunity to learn where horror started for you.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great. I always love to talk about it and think about it and remember being scared.
Yeah, absolutely.
Back in the day.
And I do want to say this again. links in the description. Make sure you guys are checking this out because I'm a huge fan of hers, and for her to be on here for my 200th episode, dropping that again, has meant the world to me. And Jerry, don't go anywhere. I have a couple more questions for you. Everybody else, as always, 200th time you've heard it, but it's never going to get old for me. Keep talking horror, stay what you are, and we'll see you guys soon.